Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It is the latest episode of Gibbo's Corner. I'm Andy Musgrove and of course I'm joined by John Gibson. We are back recording this for YouTube as well, and as you can see I'm wearing our nice branded The Everything is Black and White podcast t-shirt. We do have a Gibbo's Corner t-shirt as well. I'm sure you've seen it knocking about on social media. John, it's sweltering here, that's why you haven't got your shirts on.
Correct it is, but we can stand it. We need a bit of sunshine on us, Geordies, before the season starts.
Yes, we're going to stay away from the pre-season. We're recording this the day after Newcastle's defeat to York. Hopefully by the time you hear this, Newcastle will have made one or two signings in the transfer window, but we won't hold our breaths. We've been kind of scraping along for the next episode of this, and we've come up with a really good one, I think, and it is the best Newcastle United partnerships.
Yep.
Obviously, the first thing that springs to mind is strikers. But I just want to get, first of all, your opinion on what makes a good partnership, whether that be strikers, midfielders, centre-backs, full-backs. What, in your opinion, makes a good partnership?
I think it's understanding between the pair, because you can throw in good players, good individual players together, and they won't necessarily gel. It's a matter of knowing, if you're an attacker, seeing the other ones run very early, and therefore being able to play the right ball. If defensively, when to drop off and just cover your partner in a critical situation. It is gelling together, and it's gelling together on the field of play. It doesn't matter if you're friends or you're not friends off the park. That has got nothing to do with it. It is football intelligence, I guess. And we'll go into it in some detail, but in comparing some partnerships with others, you can talk about other partners the number one guy had, and they just didn't really work. These are what works, and of course we want to start with the fighter pilots, the poster boys, because strikers are what it's about with Newcastle. Number 9 legends, goal scorers. They're the guys that grab the headlines. They're the guys that live in our memory. And so let's look at those first.
And we're going to start with two men who many fans will consider the best ever strikers to have played for Newcastle. Probably in living memory. I'm not talking about
Correct.
Jackie and those that went before, because a lot of people, or most people listening to this, wouldn't have been around to see him play. We're starting with Alan Shearer and Les Ferdinand. Just one season they played together, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And we both know that they wish they'd played more seasons together. We all do. I've got the stats here. So they played in that 96-97 season, of course, the one where Keegan famously walked out in the January.
Yeah.
They scored 49 goals between them that season, which is a remarkable amount. Not the highest ever scored, and we'll get onto that later on with another two familiar names, but a fantastic tally nonetheless. And they were just brilliant. Individually, they were brilliant. And then together, collectively, many people thought it wouldn't work, but goodness me, didn't it just?
Oh, I mean, it was said quite openly by an awful lot of people, and I'm not talking about fans, I'm talking about hacks and pundits, that they would never be able to play together because there were two target men, it was said, and each one would want to play that role, that ultra-central role, and there would be no partnership because they would be doing each other's jobs. Nothing could have been further from the truth the way it worked, and the great sadness of Newcastle United was that it just worked. It was just together for one season, and both have paid huge tribute. I mean, for Alan Shearer to say the best partnership that he had was with Ferdinand when it lasted one season. When you think of all the people he played with, Beardsley and Bellamy, etc., up here, and with England, Sheringham was a wonderful partnership with England. Sutton was a successful partnership with Blackburn when they won the championship. But these two just went together magnificently, and it was at the climax of the Entertainers, and so it was at the wonderful part of the Entertainers. They'd gone higher and higher, season by season, and they finished off, of course, by back-to-back seasons being runners-up in the Premier League. The first season without Shearer, Ferdinand was the first to arrive, and he played one season here in the number 9 shirt, and I mean, he was everything that Newcastle fans would want. He was big, he was bold, he was good looking, he had a regal presence about him, hence the Sir Les tale. Newcastle had chased him for 18 months before they got him. He signed in June 1995, $6 million. Aston Villa had bumped the price up because they were in for him, and Newcastle realised it's now or never, stuck the money down, and got a bloke who Beardsley went on to say was the best header of the ball he'd ever seen in the whole of his career. I mean, he was a larger-in-life character, Ferdy. He was 28-year-old when he signed for Newcastle. That would be too old for Mike Ashley, by the way. He wouldn't be worth having because his best days are gone. Oh, yeah? His 2 years at Newcastle were his best days. He was 28. He was entering his prime. He'd learned football the hard way. I'm not saying that's necessary, but it has its advantages. He'd begun in non-league football with Hayes, who, in fact, received £600,000 on a sell-on clause when Newcastle paid the $6 million. And I always remember going down to Hayes with Gateshead, when I owned Gateshead, to play a game and walking in the boardroom, and there was this huge Les Ferdinand shirt framed and signed by Les. And I said, hey, that's the best deal you've ever done in your life. Not only did he get a couple of quid when he moved into league, but he got 600,000 when he moved to Newcastle. And I mean, his first season here as a number 9, which was the season when we blew the 12-point lead over Manchester United. I mean, he was phenomenal.
Blistering, wasn't he? Just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a guy that suffered was carrying a hip injury that season. A lot of people have forgotten. He scored 29 goals carrying a hip injury and without a great partner at his side. But Newcastle, and the tragedy is that in the run-in when Newcastle blew that 12-point lead, he was never as fit and as mobile as he had been earlier in the season because he had this hip injury. A lot wasn't made of that at the time, and of course it wasn't, because you weren't going to tell the opposition what the problem was. But, you know, it was a great tragedy, and the way that Keegan tried to go around and get around the tragedy was by saying, well, we blew a 12-point lead, but I'm going to pay a world record fee to bring in Shearer to go with Ferdinand. Now see how we go the following season. And that was the difference, Andrew, with Keegan to other managers, other Newcastle managers and other managers we can think of today, whether it's Gareth Southgate with England, whether it's Steve Bruce with Newcastle United, and etc., etc. Keegan was a gambler. He was a tack-minded gambler. He had been a forward himself, and all he was concerned about was scoring goals. If we score enough goals, it doesn't matter if we let in a few, because we're scoring more than the opposition. So he would look at a Newcastle United situation where we blew 12-point lead and not say, I want a centre-half and 2 full-backs and a goalkeeper because if I can close up shop, we could have won the title. They scored a pile of goals. Ferdinand scored 29, and he says, I need a centre-forward. Because that's that's how the entertainers were so exciting.
And I mean, we don't look back now and think, I wish I hadn't have done that, because we got the memories of Shearer and Ferdinand again, and Shearer in the years after. And I mean,
and we never got closer, Andrew. You've got to remember, 2 back-to-back runners up, because although he went in the second season halfway through, it was his team that just continued and fulfilled the season. Since 1927, when they won the last title, and even I wasn't a little in my dad's eye at that time, this is as close as we've ever got, so it worked better than anything else has worked.
So Shearer arrived, he obviously was going to get the number 9 shirt, and he had to ask Les Ferdinand if he could take it. He was never going to take no for an answer. And I guess, given how well Ferdinand had done the season before in that shirt, and all the history that went with it before he took it on, and he had matched many of the strikers who had worn it before him.
Absolutely.
It took some character for a man like that to say, do you know what, for the better of the people of Tyneside, for the better of the club, I am going to step aside, give Alan what he wants, and we'll show it together that in many ways This football club is bigger than just a number.
Yeah, I would like to give Les that sort of credence and that sort of pat on the back, but it wasn't quite like that. He was told by Keegan that he didn't have the number 9 shirt anymore, that the new signing was going to get the number 9 shirt, and he was very, very, very dischuffed and made it abundantly clear to Keegan, I am not pleased. I scored 29 goals in this number 9 shirt. Let him have the 10 shirt. I've got it, and I've justified having it by scoring 29. I can be one of the number 9 legends because I've just proved it. Of course, he wasn't going to make the ultimate fuss about it because he was going to get a great partner, and he bowed to that, but he made no secret to me privately that he was told by Keegan this is going to happen, and he told Keegan, well, you're the gaffer, you decide, but I'm not pleased. But he wanted to make Alan Shearer pleased. He just spent a world record sum on Shearer, so he had to do it. And the interesting thing was, everybody said they don't go together, but the fish go with chips, the Batman go with Robin, does Morecambe go with Wise, milk and honey, they went together beautifully. And the great sadness of that season, I guess, although we finished second top again, we were never really in contention for the title like we were the previous season. And I think there was 2 reasons for that. Both suffered injuries for significant periods during that season, Ferdinand and Shearer. Still scored, as you said, 49 goals between them. Shearer got 28, Ferdy got 21. But they were both missing for significant parts. And the club had its end knocked in when Keegan took to his toes, because everything had been built round KK. And he had reassured players. He had stopped Ginola going to Barcelona by saying, stay here and we'll win the title, because I'm going to make certain we do, and we'll buy a top signing, and a world record signing was exactly that. He had persuaded Shearer not to go, so Shearer turned down Manchester United, and Ginola couldn't go to Barcelona, so they could be together and Newcastle could win a title. Then KK takes to his toes halfway through the season, so you can imagine how deflated a lot of key players were when that happened, and certainly Ginola felt completely and utterly let down and eventually left the club as a consequence. Shearer is far too politically correct to ever have suggested he felt let down by KK. But there's no question that having come here instead of Manchester United, which guaranteed you medals, because he thought that he would get a First Division, a Premier League title with Newcastle, and that's the ultimate. And he came to do that. And the tragedy is that the guy that moved in, Kenny Dalglish, who was to a great extent Shearer's choice, he didn't make the choice, but he agreed with it because he'd won the title at Blackburn with him. But he took apart the entertainer's side, and he split the partnership between Ferdinand and Shearer. And you just can't believe that happened.
Well, it was interesting because I was reading back some quotes from Les Ferdinand from a few years ago, and he said, I never wanted to leave Newcastle, but he felt when Kenny came in, and he said it was kind of a thing with English managers, they want to rip apart the former team because if they do well, and it's the former manager's team that's done well, not the new manager. And of course, Kenny tried to persuade him to come back. And interestingly, in the quotes, everyone knows the story. He went down to Spurs. Shearer got injured. They tried to say, please don't go. And Ferdinand says he called Shearer, and Shearer said, look, I want you to come back, but I understand the way you've been treated. If you want to go to Spurs, boyhood club, I totally understand where you're coming from. And he ended up obviously going to Spurs, and the rest is history. Such a shame, because...
But it is a dreadful shame. But anybody would have done that, Andrew. If you're told... Dalglish made it plain that he just wanted to play with one man up front. That man was always going to be Shearer. So he he decided to cash in on Ferdinand, that they wouldn't be able to play together. He told Ferdinand it was a board decision for financial reasons. Ferdinand has never believed that in his life. He believed that if Dalglish had gone to the board and said, if we keep Shearer and Ferdinand together, having finished second last season and they scored all those goals, we'll win the title this season, the board would have said, yeah, we'll do that. Because the board were as progressive in those days as Keegan was. That's how Keegan could flourish and do everything he did, buying in all these players, because he got the approval of John Hall. And that would have continued at that stage, so Ferdinand never bought that. He was horrendously hurt. He went off to sign for Spurs. Then Shearer gets a horrendous injury pre-season at Everton. And then Freddie Fletcher is asked to phone up Ferdinand, who was physically in London and walking to the meeting he's going to have with London, gets a phone call and is told, why don't you come back? Shearer's got injured, would like you to play for Newcastle. If Newcastle United, in the shape of Dalglish, had turned their back on you and said, we want you out of this club, you're not going to jump on the next train back to Newcastle because Shearer's injured. When you've been humiliated, you're going to say, sorry pal, I'm on my way.
You just want to feel wanted and loved.
Correct.
And that clearly wasn't an example of that. And it's funny now because you think about it, and we've discussed it in previous episodes, but 30 years old, 6 million, and you think about that today, you think about the world's best players at this point in 2021, Messi, Ronaldo, there's a few
look at their age.
Yeah, they're well over 30, and you just think, goodness me, how times change. But let's talk about the ability of the two. They were quite similar in many ways. Good in the air, they were strong. They had a bit of pace, but they weren't the fastest. But I tell you what, faster than you or I. And they knew where the back of the net was.
Yeah. I mean, they dovetailed tremendously because they worked off each other. And because all of a sudden, if you're a defender coming to St. James's Park and you're the number one defender who's good in the air, and you think, which one am I going to take, the man? Or worse, who takes the other one?
You kind of flip a coin, don't you, whichever side it lands on.
I mean, it is frightening. And if they work off each other near post, far post, etc., they're going to cause chaos. And with the players that they had around them, it wasn't only their ability to score goals, and they had this wonderful ability to know where the net is, which is God-given. You've either got it or you haven't got it. You cannot coach it into players. Players that can't score goals don't suddenly start scoring goals because somebody's coached them in a different way. It is a natural instinct that you've got or you haven't got. And I mean, a typical example of their ability to work off each other and for all the people around them to profit by them being there was when we beat Manchester United 5-0 and they both scored, and it ended up with a chip by Albert. That was, you could hold that up and say that was what the entertainers led by Ferdinand and Shearer were all about. And the great tragedy was that was broken up very quickly by Dalglish, and then we ended up getting people like Bonds and Rush and Tomlinson to come in. I mean, Bonds and Rush, at their height, were two of the greatest players this country's ever seen when they were at Liverpool. But by the time they come to Newcastle, they were on a payday. They weren't the players they were at all. And so we smashed up that partnership. To have those guys at this stage of their career, I don't think so.
Well, it's interesting. Again, I read a stat when I was doing the research for this episode, and that season, that 96-97 season, only Manchester United scored more goals than Newcastle. The season after, only Wimbledon scored less. Yep. So that puts it in perspective, because at the time Bonds and Rush were 34, 35, if my memory serves me correct. So it was a weird decision. But you mentioned the Man United game then, and that was where I was going to end when it comes to Shearer and Ferdinand. Was that, like you said, is the perfect example, because they both got on the score sheet. But what stands out in my mind is that cross from Shearer for Ferdinand's goal. He's into the corner, he pulls it back, Ferdinand heads it, it's off the bar and in. Martin Tyler, Ferdinand, of course, off the bar, of course, and then Shearer and the celebration to the Man United fans in the court. It was remarkable. I think that moment just sums it up.
And that moment summed up the fact that there were a partnership.
Yeah.
Because a lot of strikers that don't go together because they irritate one another because they only want to do one job, and that's being playing in the centre of the field and being the target man. A lot of people saw that as something that couldn't happen. Shearer actually being out wide and setting up Ferdinand. And they did play like that together, and that was the joy of it, because with a lot of quality players we've tried to see at Newcastle, and we'll be mentioning some later on, they just didn't go together. It wasn't going to happen. But it did between them two, and they were big enough, they were confident enough, they knew they were good. They weren't worried about who was going to be top dog. Shearer knew he's top dog, and Ferdinand wasn't willing to give anything to anybody, and they were clever enough, they knew to work together would benefit them personally.
And I guess as well, to have someone of that quality next to you, and obviously you had other players like Asprilla as well, to have that quality around you just drives you on to be, you know that you need to be top of your game to keep your players, and we saw the best of it in that season. Of course, on to the next partnership, and it's kind of linked because Ferdinand came in to replace one of these gents, and the other guy was really important in that season that Shearer and Ferdinand was so brilliant as well. And we're talking about Andy Cole and Peter Beardsley.
Yeah, again, which was quite a phenomenal partnership.
Well, I bet you, when you'd watch Cole and Beardsley, I bet you were thinking, goodness me, this is some partnership. I bet you thought, I'm not sure when I'm going to see the likes of this again. Then it was only a couple of seasons later.
Yes, absolutely. And it was all wrapped up in this mantra of what Kevin Keegan's about. I mean, it's a story I've told before, but it's worth repeating here, because they were sort of just before we got Ferdinand arriving and doing what he did. And if you remember, Andy was a very young man who'd come from Bristol City to Newcastle, and Keegan famously, Andy only went in to the officers on a day off to collect his post, and he was spotted by KK, who was in the car park, and he said, get in the car. And he got in the car, and the next thing he knew, he was on the way to Liverpool, and he said, I want you to sit and watch Les Ferdinand play centre forward for QPR. He said, because that is the ultimate centre forward's role. He is the best. He's the complete centre forward, in the air, touch, goal scoring, dropping into pockets of space, etc. And the idea of KK was that you'd buy Ferdinand and Ferdinand would play with Cole. That was what was intended. Incredibly, as you touched upon, Andy went to Manchester United quite sensationally. Ferdinand replaced Andy instead of playing alongside him, and then Shearer was brought in. So getting rid of Cole, which was sensational at the time, it would be... There's nothing comparable to it today, because Newcastle haven't got a goal scorer like that. But it was sensational, and the famous words, trust me, that Keegan said to the fans. If the only way you could replace Andy Cole is with Ferdinand and Shearer and top what Andy Cole was giving you. And that's what he did. But the partnership between Cole and Beardsley was quite phenomenal and very different to the partnership of the other two, because the partnership of the other two there were two battering rams. Shearer, and I mean it in the nicest possible way, Shearer and Ferdinand were battering rams. They physically terrified the opposition. Andy Cole was slight. He wasn't dynamic in the air like the other two. Both the other two, Shearer as well was top class in the air. Andy Cole wasn't. Beardsley was as creative as he was a finisher. He could do both. He wasn't an out-and-out goal poacher at all. But when they were put together, I mean, Andy Cole Also, there were different personalities. Andy Cole is one of the shyest guys I've ever known when he come up to Newcastle. I mean, I remember Kevin Keegan talking to me about it when he signed him. He said, he said a lot of people in football at the time didn't want to touch Andy Cole. They thought he had an attitude problem. He was aloof, he was indifferent, he had an attitude problem, and that put an awful lot of people off him because Arsenal had let him go, and he went from a top club without breaking through to Bristol Rovers, and everybody saying, he might look good, he might be quick, and of course he was that much quicker than the other two. He might be quicker, but you've got an attitude problem with this guy. Don't take a chance. Now, Keegan was never put off with that. Keegan always looked and signed a player on ability, then worried about how you might handle him when he come. But that was his great strength, Keegan, anyway, handling people, so he always felt he could do that. And the thing with Andy, I said, well, why did he have a go? He said he was only 21. An attitude problem was still can mould him at 21. He said, and what made him decide he wanted to sign him was when he played against Newcastle. He said he was out, he pulled out wide, he was out wide. How he had come out wide to mark him and close him off, he said, and he flicked the ball round Steve Howie. He ran off the pitch and up the tram line and back on the pitch behind Howie to cotton onto the ball and go away. And KK said, oh, did I like that? I thought, this kid is fast. He has a go. He's clever about it. He said, and I decided after seeing that I wanted to see him play for Bristol City again. He said, but the difficulty was the geography. It takes an eternity to get down to Bristol from Newcastle. He said, and I was sitting in this afternoon in the office, and I was talking away to Terry Mack about Cole and how I fancied him and how he might be the answer to our problems. He said, and Douglas Hall, the son of Sir John Hall, popped his head round the door and said, what's going on, boys? And he said, hey, I'm talking about this lad Cole. He says, I think he's the answer for us. He said, and playing tonight, he said, but getting down to Bristol by car at this time of day to see him tonight, but I'd love to see him. Douglas Hall got Cameron Hall's private plane from Teesside, put the two of them in it. He says within an hour we're down at the game. He said, and when I got there I discovered that Andy Cole was a doubt for the game. And he said, I thought, oh, I don't believe this. We've done all this and he mightn't play. But Andy Cole asked to play and said he'd play carrying an injury, and Keegan said again, oh, I like that. He's not a chicken. He will have a go for you. And he said he was absolutely terrific. And he signed him. And he was so... People thought he was aloof, but he was shy. He was absolutely shy. And he was never a nightclub merchant, and I'm not against that because I... rather paid a few visits there with a few of the lads down the years, but he was never going to be a big-time Charlie. He never wanted a flat on the quayside, which in those days, that was the thing to do. You got a flat on this St. Peter's Basin.
Didn't he?
Sorry?
He lived up in Durham and Cook. Is that right?
He went to Crook.
Crook.
He went to Crook to live, and... unbelievable. There's never been a professional footballer out of Newcastle that wasn't born in Crook, that lived in Crook. And he chose to live in Crook and was completely and utterly isolated. His big pal became Lee Clark. Lee Clark was his big pal, and they were terrific for each other. Lee Clark said he owed him an awful lot, because Clarkie, if you fall out with Kevin Keegan, you're in big trouble when he was manager. You remember the famous story of Bez when he given a bit of this because he was left exposed by Ginola against Aston Villa at home, and within quarter of an hour, Keegan had him off the field, subbed for Robbie Elliott within the first quarter of an hour, and he didn't play again for 6 weeks, didn't get anywhere near the team. And Lee Clark said at Southampton, I think it was, he got subbed during the game, and he was so annoyed he'd come off and he kicked the bucket, he almost kicked his own bucket and was the end of his career at Newcastle. He kicked the bucket as he come off the pitch in frustration of being sent off. And KK, you know, you show some defiance. Like, oh, KK, who could get the pet lip on himself a bit, but didn't like it on anybody else. And he said, at that moment, I thought my career was through. But he said, Andy Cole, who was the big goal-scoring centre-forward at Newcastle that KK needed, had his back and supported and said, he's a young lad, you've got to understand. I mean, I remember, because there was a fury on that night when this happened. And the next night, Gateshead were playing at home, and all of a sudden, who appears, and I'm owning Gateshead at the time, who appears and says, Gibbo, can I hide away in the boardroom and sit and watch a game? It was Lee Clark trying to keep away from everybody by getting into the Gateshead match. But Coley looked after Lee Clark, and he formed this partnership with Peter Beardsley. And again, what I was saying early on, you don't necessarily have to be in each other's pockets as the best friends ever for it to work. It's football knowledge. And it worked because Beardsley could set you up. And it worked with the other two because there were hammer throwers that destroyed it. This worked because Beardsley set Cole up, and Cole scored 41 goals in the first season we were in the top flight. And not one of them was a penalty, not one of them was direct free kick. And I reckon at least half of those goals, Beardsley himself got 24. This is our very first season of Premier League football. Beardsley got 24, Cole got 41, and I bet Beardsley made 2/3 of Cole's goals because he knew how quick Cole was, and Cole knew that if he got on his bike, Beardsley would find him. Doesn't matter what the traffic's like, it doesn't matter if there's players in the way, he'll curl it, he'll slip it in between two defenders, he'll nutmeg somebody, but you just make the run and Beardsley will find you. And that's exactly what they did.
So, I mean, they hit 55 goals in that season, which it's still a record, Premier League record for a partnership. But of course, I mean, before we got into Beardsley and Cole, I know they're the partnership with Thomas, but it's key to remember that Cole came in during the championship winning season, and he formed an unbelievable partnership with David Kelly, didn't he? I mean, them two together were unbelievable. And then we saw the brutality of Keegan to say to Kelly, right, off you go, and then bring Beardsley in. And I mean, that was a gamble in itself by Keegan, but it paid off.
Yeah, but it was a gamble, but it was made on sound judgment. I mean, in my humble opinion, and at the time, not in hindsight, David Kelly was Dwight Gale. He was a top second division or championship striker who would score a pile of goals in that division, but he wasn't a top flight striker, and Keegan knew that. And I think we won 7 against Leicester when we went up, and I think both Kelly and Cole scored hat-trick. But Kelly never, and if you notice Kelly's career, if you looked at the whole of his career, Ned's career, he never scored a pile of goals in the top division. And Keegan wasn't the only manager once they got in the top division that didn't say, God bless you, mate, off you go now. And it wasn't going to work. And funny enough, Beardsley was always in this situation because Beardsley could play. He could play, he could finish, he could create. If God put together an all-round footballer that had everything, the ability to make goals and the ability to score goals, that was better than Peter Beardsley, he slipped him through the back door and I missed him because I didn't see anybody that was greater at doing that. And the whole point is that if you go way, way back on Beardsley, the same thing as that Keegan did with Kelly in saying sorry, and then this partnership worked wonderful. When Keegan come to Newcastle as a player, in his first season, Newcastle did well, but just missed out on promotion. And the partnership that Newcastle had that season was Keegan and Ray Varady. Now that was a partnership that didn't work. Like I've said, all partnerships don't work. on the surface, it might well have looked as though it worked to the untutored eye because Vivaldi was blisteringly quick and could score goals. But his second touch was a tackle. The ball ran away from him. You didn't play him to feet and then play off him. You played it over the top and let him open his legs, run and try to finish. And at the end of that first season, Keegan went to see Arthur Cox and said, I'm sorry, Arthur, but if I'm going to stay on for the second season, we've got to play the way I play to get the best out of me from your point of view. And I need a centre forward who will play to feet. He'll play me into feet, I can play to his feet because he can play. Vivaldi, you don't play to his feet because the ball bounces away from him. You play it over the top. That is not my game. That's not going to get the best out of me. Ray Vivaldi was absolutely decimated because he loved it at Newcastle, but he was sold. And then this little lad appears at St James's Park from Vancouver Whitecaps, and KK told me the story afterwards. He said he was sitting in the dressing room, and Arthur Cox was there, and Keegan said to Arthur Cox, "Who's that little fellow over there?" He says, "That's your new partner." He said, "That's the fellow I've brought in." He says, "He's 3'6". He looks about 13-year-old, and what was it, Peter Beardsley? Never heard of him. He said, "I haven't heard of him because he's been at Vancouver Whitecaps." He said, "But I'll tell you what, you're not half going to be grateful. You take my word for it. You're going to be grateful I got him." And KK said, after 2 or 3 training sessions, I thought, he'll do for me. He'll do for me.
And I guess that shows the strength of how good that partnership was, that he brought him back towards the end of his career. Was
built on that. And Beardsley was built on that. Beardsley absolutely adored Keegan. Hero worshipped him almost. I mean, it was Keegan who called him Pedro because he had this little Spanish ability. And he became... Keegan became his mentor when they were playing together. It was a intriguing forward line because I haven't seen a forward line like it at Newcastle because it was Keegan, Waddle and Beardsley, and it was built on what Keegan wanted. All three could play. All three were comfortable on the ball. All three got a load of England caps in their career, but there wasn't an out-and-out centre forward in that three. They just interlocked, they swapped positions. It was difficult, therefore, to mark them. But there wasn't a centre forward. I mean, when we had Ferdinand and Shearer, we had 2 centre forwards. That side virtually had no centre forwards, but it worked brilliant. And Beardsley adored KK, looked up to him, his work ethic and training. I mean, this was a superstar, England skipper. Played for Hamburg and won European Player of the Year, won the European Cup with Liverpool. Keegan thought, this is wonderful, and he thought, and Keegan thought, this little fella, he can off-play. And that's why he went back and got him, of course, for when he was manager for the Entertainers.
Now, we both agree that Peter Beardsley is the best Newcastle United player we've seen in the flesh.
Yes.
In terms of with Andy Cole, was it a case that Peter Beardsley was just that good that if anybody was on the end of the pass, they would score goals, or did they have something together which just clicked?
No, that would be to downgrade Andy Cole. No, you can't. If I was Andy Cole, the best partner I would want would be Beardsley. And if I was Beardsley, I would want a centre forward with pace that I could hit every time, and that's Andy Cole. No, Andy Cole was special. He was a natural goal scorer. And it wasn't a matter of Beardsley just happened to make him. It was very good that he was a very lucky man in some ways that he played for Kevin Keegan and Alex Ferguson, because both were forward thinkers, and in terms of forward, I mean getting forward. And the partnership, Cole went on to another magnificent partnership, which was more the obvious, the 2 twin strikers at Manchester United with Dwight York. But Cole had massive ability as a finisher. The funny thing is with Andy,